Not for a second do I minimise the Indigenous contribution to our national life, but I do think that these welcomes and acknowledgements are well and truly overdone. Other than in a specific Indigenous context, why should we be welcomed to someone else's country when the country belongs to all of us equally?
2025 is a year of change. Cultural and political disruption is transforming our nation and the global order. The rebellion against the establishment has accelerated. Australia and the Western Alliance is now at a crossroads. Either the mainstream will continue its ascendancy or the elites will prevail.
Welcome to Australia's Future with Tony Abbott. My name is John Roscombe. I'm a Senior Fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs. And as we do, we're talking with Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister, Distinguished Fellow of the IPA. We are 4 days away from the 2025 federal election, and there's a lot to talk about. Welcome, Tony. Let's get into it. Welcome to country. You gave a wonderful interview today with Ben Fordham. Do you want to talk about what you said to Australia?
Well, thanks, John. Look, I believe that Australia has an Indigenous heritage, a British foundation and an immigrant character. So not for a second do I minimise the Indigenous contribution to our national life. But I do think that these welcomes and acknowledgements are well and truly overdone. And I guess, other than in a specific Indigenous context, I have a fundamental problem in principle with them. Why should we be welcomed to someone else's country when the country belongs to all of us equally? Why should we have the Indigenous elders acknowledged and not the early settlers, not the post-war migrants, not the people who run our schools and hospitals, who are our military veterans and so on? I just think this is wrong in principle. I say good on Peter Dutton for being prepared to acknowledge this during the election campaign. There's a sense in which I wish these things had been tackled a long time ago. But what's happened over the last few years is that they've gone from being, if you like, the exception to becoming the rule. No government minister stands up to make a speech under Anthony Albanese without an elaborate acknowledgement of country.
Standing in front of three flags.
No university lecture begins without some kind of acknowledgement. My very, very young grandson brought a report home from preschool a while back saying how well he participated in Reconciliation Week activities and so on. So these things have become pervasive, and I just think they're fundamentally divisive. I don't think we should be welcomed to the particular Indigenous clan's territory every time we land in Melbourne or Sydney and Brisbane. I think we should put these things behind us.
So, Tony, Australians were told, certainly by some supporters of the Yes case, that if we voted no to the Voice, that welcome to countries would end.
And I think
what's happened?
Millions of Australians cheered when Marcia Langton made that rather sour observation. Unfortunately, they haven't ended. In fact, in some quarters, I think they've been even increased as a way of giving the two-fingered salute to the people who voted no. Look, we are one people, we are one country, and yes, there are all sorts of things that have come together to create the great Australia that we enjoy today, and the Indigenous heritage is an essential part of that, but the country belongs equally to all of us. I live on the northern beaches of Sydney. It was once Gadigal country, but it now belongs to all of us. And no one should be singled out as being particular or exceptional simply on the basis of race, ancestry, or length of time that there's a connectedness with Australia.
Can I talk to you about the media and the politicians' reaction to this? So, of course, the immediate cause for this discussion was what happened here at the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne on Anzac Day. But following that, News Limited ran a poll through their newspapers and media outlets. Something like 160,000 Australians voted, and 67%, I think it was, said welcome to country should be ended entirely. An extra 20% said that it should be dramatically wound back. Now, none of this public popular attitude is reflected in the media or reflected certainly in the Labor Party. What for you explains that disconnect between what mainstream Australians think and what we voted for in the referendum and what politicians and the media are presenting to us?
Plainly, the smarter people in the Labor Party are aware of this undercurrent of unhappiness with the ubiquity of these now almost mandatory welcomes and acknowledgements. For instance, on Sunday night, when this matter came up in the debate between the opposition leader and the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese really sat on the fence.
Wasn't that significant?
It was, and he said, look, it's really a matter for the organisation.
He ran away from it.
He ran away from it, even though this has been really one of the constants of his government ever since he opened up on election night in 2022 by saying, I commit to the Uluru Statement in full. So look, he did run away from it, and that's because he knows how people are thinking. And look, I think it's understandable. I mean, I think there's been an undercurrent. This has been the undercurrent in the election campaign, that we are not prepared to face up to so many of the key issues, whether it's economic issues, whether it's strategic issues, whether it's cultural and societal issues.
Why do you think cultural issues have been a sleeper to some extent in this election?
And I don't think none of us want to gratuitously upset people. And I guess once you start talking about culture, there is a tendency for people to readily take offence, and there's certainly a tendency...
And we want to be polite.
And there's certainly a tendency on the part of the media to foment outrage, and we understandably want to try to avoid that. But again, I stress, we are one people, one country, and yes, we all have different backgrounds. I mean, you and I have slightly different backgrounds, John. Some backgrounds are much more diverse than others, but in the end, if we are going to be a successful country, the stress has got to be on our unity, not on our diversity. And I think for the last generation or so, ever since this policy of multiculturalism was widely embraced in official circles, there's been a growing anxiety on the part of many, many millions of Australians that the essential unity of our country was being devalued.
When we were getting our coffees earlier, you were telling me about a welcome to country that you once gave. Do you want to recount that story?
Well, sure, John. It was back in 2007, and I was hosting the APEC Health Ministers Conference in Sydney, and I was told that part of the APEC protocols were that there would be a welcome to country.
You were told this by a senior Australian public servant.
I was. And so I said, well, fair enough, if that's the rules. We don't want to break the rules, but I'll do it. And so, yes, I acknowledged the Indigenous heritage going back tens of thousands of years, but I also acknowledged the Judeo-Christian heritage. I acknowledged the heritage of Greece and Rome. I acknowledged the heritage of Mother England. And I said all of these wonderful influences have come together in the great nation that is modern Australia. And if we are prepared to acknowledge the whole lot, that's great. But we don't. We simply acknowledge the Indigenous dimension. And for the 96% of us who don't seem to have Aboriginal ethnicity or heritage, I think that's a little bit devaluing. And I all Peter Dutton has said, quite rightly, is that it's overdone. There's no suggestion that there aren't circumstances where it's right, but to have it as semi-mandatory, as is effectively the case today, I think is just wrong.
And I think what Peter Dutton has said, personally speaking, has been strong. I think if he was to say there might be, if he was to form government, there would be one welcome to country
And
at
one
the opening,
flag, not three.
At the opening of every sitting of Parliament, perhaps, but that would be the appropriate place for it, and the idea that we go to these events and there's 3, 4, 5, 6
and every
people.
speaker stands up
and says the same thing.
And gives an elaborate acknowledgement, almost falling over themselves to outdo each other in the enthusiasm of their acknowledgement.
It's not appropriate.
No.
What else? So we've talked. So from my perspective, certainly, I think this cultural undercurrent is alive. We've seen it in the polls. We've seen that in the attitude to welcome to country and Anzac Day over the last few days. We've talked about in the last podcast things that we have talked about. What haven't we talked about in the campaign? What are the things that you would have liked to have seen aired and still might get an airing in the next 3 or 4 days?
Well, essentially, John, this election is a referendum on a bad government. And my essential point, and obviously I'm a former Liberal Prime Minister, but my essential point is, why would we reward a bad government? Why would we give the Albanese government 3 more years, given everything that it's got wrong and all of the things that it's deceived us on over the last 3 years, starting with the infamous $275 promised cut to power prices. But then there were the blatant deceptions on the stage 3 tax cuts, on no extra taxes on super, on no industry-wide bargaining. Then we've got all the absolute deluge of lies during this campaign. I mean, the lie that the coalition's nuclear policy will somehow cost $600 billion.
Mediscare,
of
these
the
things.
lie that Peter Dutton cut $80 billion out of health and education. The lie that under Albanese you just have to produce your Medicare card, whereas under Dutton you'll have to produce your Amex card as well in an Americanised health system. I mean, this is nonsense on stilts, frankly. It's a travesty, an absolute travesty, and to reward failure, to reward deceit, I just think will debase our polity. So that's my essential point. But I mean, let's take cost of living, which everyone says is the number one issue in the campaign. Cost of living problems are a reflection of the economic vandalism that we've seen from this government over the last 3 years, starting with the emissions obsession, which has driven our power prices up and up and damaged reliability in the system. Then, of course, there's the spending addiction, which has kept interest rates higher for longer than would otherwise have been the case.
Same scale as Whitlam.
Then there's the union loyalty, which is making it increasingly difficult for people to run their businesses. And in the end, as all of us should realise, you can't subsidise your way to success. You can't tax your way to prosperity. Wealth is not created by government. Wealth is created by successful businesses run by individuals or corporations. And this is something which the Green Left Labor Party simply doesn't understand, and the coalition does. I mean, my fundamental point is that under the coalition, taxes will always be lower, spending will always be less, regulation will always be less burdensome, because that is simply in the DNA of the coalition. Does that mean that taxes will be as low as we'd like? Probably not. Does it mean that spending will be as efficient as it should be? Probably not. But nevertheless, it will be better under the coalition than under the alternative, particularly given the way this is not the Hawke-Keating Labor Party.
Even the Beazley-Crean Labor Party.
This is sort of the Bant-Albanese
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, what would Bob Hawke make of today's Labor Party?
Well, I suppose we should be careful of verballing the dead, but just take Israel, for instance. I mean, Bob Hawke made the immortal statement that if the bell tolls for Israel, it doesn't just toll for Israel, it tolls for all mankind. And yet what we've seen from the current government is a uniform vote against Israel at the UN, increasing public criticism of Israel.
Are you shocked their preference the Greens second?
There's the apparent willingness of the government to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu should he turn up in this country because of the ICC's warrant. Look, I am deeply shocked at the anti-Semitism, the Jew hatred, which appears to be rampant in our country right now.
And preferences to the Greens?
And preferences to the Greens is a manifestation of the decline of the Labor Party. I mean, a mainstream party should not preference the extremes. Back in 1998 and subsequently, when One Nation were a vastly different and worse party than they've become, John Howard was crystal clear, put One Nation last. Now, there was, on the fringes of the Liberal Party, there was a degree of sympathy, I have to say, for One Nation, but John Howard had the strength to say no. One Nation in those days were a menace. They were a destructive element. Albanese should have the same strength of character, the same political courage. He says that the Greens are extremists. He says that the Greens are wrong, and then he rewards them by giving them his second preference. I mean, the Greens candidate in his own seat was one of the Green extremists who was picketing his office and making his office unsafe to man for much of the last year or so, and he's rewarded her with his preferences. It's inexplicable. And then, of course, typical, he denies that he's had anything to do with this. Doesn't even know her name, he says. Well, I mean, come on. There is no more political creature than Anthony Albanese, and of course he knows exactly what's happening and he knows exactly who everyone is.
Why does the media let him get away with it? And one of the themes of Peter Dutton's comments over the last few days, I think correctly he has called out, he's called it bias, but it's more than that. It's just a willingness to accept a government narrative that so often is patently false. Is it barracking from the media? Is it something else? Is it a lack of experience from junior journalists? What is it?
John, look, there are many factors here, and I think we do need to distinguish that there are different elements in the media. I mean, there's the ABC, if you like.
Would you have called the ABC the hate media?
Then there's News and Sky.
Would you have called them? I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you have called them the hate media as Peter Dutton did?
They certainly seem to hate anyone who is not well to the left of the general spectrum.
Well put.
And I mean, if you go back far enough, even the Hawke government was far too right wing for the ABC. But look, inside the Channel 9 group, for instance, there's the Sydney Morning Herald, which for argument's sake leans left, and then there's 2GB, which certainly leans right. So the media is not a monolith, but there is no doubt, if you listen to until very recently at least, if you listen to the Prime Minister's press conferences, there was a kind of almost jocular tone to them. If you listen to Peter Dutton's press conferences, at least as far as the media were concerned, it was incredibly hectoring.
There were gotcha and quite antagonistic questions. Conservatives too polite to the media. If this had, so people accuse Peter Dutton of being Donald Trump. Donald Trump would have put up with this for 1 second.
And this again is part of Labor's shtick, to say that Peter Dutton is some kind of antipodian Donald Trump, and everyone who they don't like and oppose is somehow a Trump clone. Well, our circumstances are very different from American circumstances. All of our politicians are very different from America's. And look, as Peter Dutton keeps saying, and certainly as I absolutely believe, the model for all Australian centre-right politicians is John Howard.
Tony Abbott, are Spain's blackouts an example of what Australia will begin to see if Anthony Albanese is re-elected?
Well, it's very early days, and no doubt there'll be a lot of examination and conjecture. I am conscious of the fact that we had a statewide blackout in 2016. South Australia was plunged into darkness for the best part of 24 hours because the wind turbines had to be closed down due to gales, and the interconnector to the reliable coal-fired power stations of Victoria was likewise damaged by the weather. This is the problem with weather-dependent power. Extreme weather produces extreme outcomes. So look, it's early days. I don't know exactly what caused this, but I think there is a hint in The Guardian, which I'm reading from, and it says, what is grid balancing? The grid needs constant management to ensure it is not overloaded by too much generation or left short by too little. This is exactly what happens when you've got intermittent, variable, weather-dependent power. The Guardian goes on. Balancing has been important as long as there has been a grid, but there is more focus on the issue because, quote, of the rapid switch to renewables like solar and wind, which are intermittent. It goes on, spinning gas turbines have been the standard technology for managing the frequency for decades, but renewables will need investment in other options such as flywheels or advanced power electronics. So the system that we have had up till now, which has relied substantially on synchronous power, coal-fired power, gas turbines, doesn't have this issue where extremes of weather can cause very wide variations in production that have to be managed. Now, if this is what's caused the Spanish problem, and Spain, like Australia, is aiming to move to 80% renewables. I think it's currently got something like 50% renewables.
It does have nuclear, but it is committed to phase out
correct
nuclear power.
So this could be a foretaste of what's possible in Australia if we keep going down this path. And because the absolute essence of modern life is access to electricity. I mean, the lights wouldn't stay on, our food couldn't be prepared.
Spain has completely shut down everything.
Our trains won't run, our lifts won't work, you can't go to a shop and make a purchase. I mean, modern life stops in the absence of 24/7 electricity. That's why this whole renewables push is so fraught with danger. And this is one of the other reasons why I think it's essential that we have a change of government, because while the coalition is not hostile to renewals, it's not obsessed with them, and it doesn't believe that renewables can be the heart of your power system. It believes, quite rightly, that we need 24/7 reliables at the heart of the system, and over time it wants to move from fossil fuels to nuclear power. Now, personally, if it's all right for China and other countries to use our coal and gas, I don't see why we can't keep using our coal and gas here in this country. And fossil fuels are at the heart not just of our power system, but at the heart of so many other industrial processes, including things like the production of the fertiliser, which 8 billion human beings need if we are to avoid food shortages as well as power shortages. So I'm in no way intrinsically hostile to fossil fuels, but the coalition has got the essential point that we need reliable 24/7 power as the absolute foundation of our electricity system.
Spain's blackouts a wake-up call to Australian voters to understand what they will be deciding on Saturday?
Well, again, John, we can't say for certain exactly what's caused them, but looking at the Guardian report, it's easy to think that there may well be an element of the transition which has triggered this, and it should be a reminder to us that there is peril aplenty in any move to a renewables only or even a renewables mainly system.
Can you reflect on the campaign? How many federal elections have you been involved in now in one way or the other? Where does this rank? What stands out for you from this campaign compared to others?
Well, I suppose I was an observer, a media observer in the 1990 election, and I've been involved one way or another as a staffer, as an MP, and then as a Prime Minister, and I guess now as a former Prime Minister who still gets a little bit involved in these things. I've now seen every election since 1990 up close. This is certainly the most consequential election that I've ever been involved in. My first vote was in 1975, and that was a very consequential election because I thought it was essential that the public endorsed the Governor-General's actions in upholding the Constitution against the unconstitutional actions of the then Whitlam government. But this is, in a sense, even more consequential because I think the Albanese government has been just as economically irresponsible as the Whitlam one. But back then, the Whitlam government seemed like an aberration. Now, regrettably, the Albanese government almost seems like the new normal, and that's why we need to say enough, halt, no, before it's too late.
Has Australia changed in that regard? I think your point that Whitlam was an aberration, but this could be the new normal that Australians may end up voting for.
Well, I remain absolutely of the view that Australia is the best country on earth, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. I do think we've been drifting backwards for some time. I do think the drift has accelerated and intensified under the current government. I do think that at the heart of all of this is the proverbial long march of the left through the institutions, which is occurring throughout the West, but particularly in the Anglosphere. And I think the most important thing that Australians could do right now to reclaim our country and to reverse this is to change the government. Now, do I say that Liberal governments are perfect? Do I say that Liberal Prime Ministers are error-free? No, of course not. But the essential instincts of the Liberal Party are very different to the essential instincts of the Labor Party, particularly the Labor Party that we know now, which is so different from the Labor Party of Hawke, of Keating and Beazley. I've frequently said that the Hawke government is the best Labor government we've ever seen because it did understand that in the end you couldn't have social progress, you couldn't have a better deal for the workers without a strong private sector economy. I've often said that Kim Beazley is one of the best Prime Ministers that we've never had, a thoroughly decent man who I think got middle Australia, very strong on the need for national security and national defence. But that's not today's Labor Party. I mean, look at the way the current government attacked Peter Dutton for committing to what I think was quite a modest increase in military spending. 2.5% within 5 years, 3% of GDP within a decade. I mean, given the urgency of our strategic circumstances, that was, if you like, the least we could do. But even that was apparently far too much for the Labor Party. And this is why it's so important that we get a change of government on Saturday.
Before I ask you for your final thoughts and messages to voters for Saturday, those who haven't already voted, one of the few certainties from the weekend will be probably a record low vote for the two major parties, and that vote has been declining since the 1970s. What do you put that down to? Do you think that our two major parties are continuing to represent mainstream Australians?
In their own way, I suppose they're doing their best. I think Labor have been altogether too permeated by the Green Left and the Long March. On our side, I think at times we could show more courage and conviction. I'm a big fan of Peter Dutton, and many of the front bench I have a lot of admiration for, and I obviously know some of them extremely well. I want our country to be its best self, and I want our major political parties to be their best selves. And I think Labor was at its best in the Hawke-Keating era, sound on the economy, strong on national security, very much wanting to bring Australians together. I think our coalition Liberal National parties were at their best in the Howard era, very robust on defence and national security. Under Peter Costello, we were, frankly, a miracle economy.
We ran a surplus and had no net debt.
They were great days, and I think most of us that can remember them look back on those days almost as a golden era. And I think we are capable of recreating that, but not by spending more and more and pretending that what the current government calls the care economy is somehow anything other than, if you like, I don't want to use the word burden in a disparaging way.
Funded by taxpayers, funded by others.
But anything which relies on taxpayers to sustain it is not increasing our net wealth. It may well be an important part of a decent society, but in the end you cannot have a community without a strong economy to sustain it, and that's what has been lost, at least under the current government. And then there's just this doubt in so many Green Left leaders about the essential legitimacy and the essential validity of the whole Australian project. I mean, this whole Invasion Day way of thinking, which characterises so much of the Green Left, it's deeply subversive of the nation that we are and must always be. I get back to the fundamental point I made at the beginning. We are one country, we are one people, and however diverse our origins, we have got to come together in an ever-increasing way if our nation is to flourish going forward.
For the tens of thousands of Australians watching and listening to this podcast who haven't yet voted, what's your final message to them for Saturday?
Again, think deeply about this vote. It matters. Every vote matters, but no vote in recent times has mattered as much as this. So think deeply about it and ask yourself this question. If you are perhaps certain that the current government doesn't deserve re-election, but doubtful about the opposition, personally, and this is the appeal I'd make, personally, I would rather take a punt on a team that might turn out to be outstanding than have the certainty of a team that we know are disastrous.
Tony Abbott, thank you for being with us.
Thanks.
This is a production of the Centre for the Australian Way of Life at the Institute of Public Affairs. To find out more, visit australia.ipa.org.au.